Alright guys, today it's story time. Y'all might be aware by now that I was a Christian fundamentalist homeschooler for the first 18 years of my life, so today I'm going to tell you some stories from my childhood growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s here in Texas. Basically, my whole outlook and my family's and community's whole outlook on life was one big conspiracy theory, which positioned us as very special and very persecuted as fundamentalists. Luckily, I got out like a decade ago, so don't worry about me, I'm fine. So I hope you enjoy this, and as you listen to my stories, see how many things you can spot from my upbringing that are now kind of mainstream talking points and ideas within the religious right in the US. Let's start with what we thought about politics. The world is controlled by satanic communists. When I was in my early teens, I had just become aware of who Hillary Clinton was. This was in the time leading up to Obama becoming president. And I remember asking my parents, okay, who is Hillary Clinton and why am I hearing so many bad things about her? I was told that Hillary and her friends want to make everyone the same by force. We had to wear the same clothes, we had the same jobs, we made the same amount of money, we were in every way non-individualistic and totally conformist. This was sold to me as a very, very bad thing, which I remember at the time thinking was a little odd, because when you're growing up fundamentalist, you are told to conform. You're supposed to wear the same clothes. You're supposed to act like other people, talk like other people, be like other people. Everything is about conformity. So this being sold as a terrible, terrible thing was a little strange. When I asked why she and her friends wanted everything to be like this, I was told, well, she's a communist. And that's what communism is. They want to erase individuality, personality, everything for the sake of complete and total conformity. I'm like, okay, mom and dad, what is communism? Tell me more about this communist thing. I'm just gonna read what I wrote down to tell you guys what I was told. Communism was a satanic ideology created by a demon-possessed atheist man in the 1800s. Karl Marx, I was not told his name. It seeks as much death and suffering as possible to please Satan, and it achieves this in part by turning people away from Christianity. Communism was satanic and meant to hide God from people and kill them. I was told after this that communists want a one-world government, so if I ever hear anyone advocating for global something, whether it's trade or alliances or anything like that, know that they are a part of the shadowy and very powerful group of communists that rule the entire world. Oh, and they are almost definitely possessed by a demon, and that's how they got to be a communist. And yes, the term democrats was thrown around a lot, although I think we consider that to be a little bit cliche. Like, everyone knows that they're demon-possessed. Saying democrats is really just kind of a tired old joke at this point. A lot of people in my church believe this kind of thing, and specifically thought that Obama was the Antichrist, as prophesied in the book of Revelation, if you interpret it in the completely biblically illiterate way that a lot of people do, in that it was not talking about the fall of the Roman Empire and the current state of like political turmoil at the time it was being written. It's what like all scholars think it is actually about. But anyway, my family was a little bit torn on whether or not Obama was the Antichrist. I was, 13, 14, so I don't know that I had a super strong opinion on it because I didn't know what was going on with politics at all. Some of my family members were like, yeah, he's the Antichrist. Some were like, I'm not sure if we have enough information to judge that yet. As we continue through this video, realize that just about every other smaller conspiracy theory that I lay out here pretty much comes down to the idea of the grand conspiracy that everything in the world is ultimately dominated and controlled by demon-possessed, satanic communists at the highest levels. The Great Replacement. I wish I could remember exactly how old I was when this speaker came to my church, talked about his experience leaving Islam. He was an ex-Muslim, and how he had discovered that Islam and Muslims themselves were evil and a bunch of things that I won't say because they are so disgusting and would also definitely get this video demonetized. During his talk to our regular church congregation of, over 500 people in the auditorium at any one time, he pulled up these charts and graphs saying that these are the numbers of Muslim population growth. These are their birth rates, and this is how many Muslims we'll have in the world by such and such year if they keep reproducing at the same rate. We were supposed to be really scared of this. I remember people kind of being taken aback and gasping when they saw just how many Muslims there will be in the world in, I think it was 2050 was the big year. He said that Muslims planned to take over the world by outbreeding every other, I'm not sure if he said race, but that was definitely the implication there. And everybody in the auditorium just believed him, that this was like a central tenet of Islam. You must take over the world by outbreeding everyone else. And also that all Muslims think exactly the same, that there's no diversity in the second largest religion in the world. Basically, everyone swallowed all of this stuff because no one knew anything about Islam in that room. We were really familiar with this type of plan, though, because there's a Christian fundamentalist movement called the Quiverful movement that we were all very, very familiar with. They actually, have or had a TV show on, I think it was TLC, 19 Kids and Counting, and the number just kept going up. It was about the Duggars. The Duggars are people who believe in outbreeding every other type of person in the world in order to take over the world. So that part was an idea that we were actually familiar with and completely supported when it was white Christians. The speaker went on to say that with this plan going forward, the Middle East would run out of room for all the Muslims at some point, as if that's where all Muslims are, which, no. So they would have to expand into America and Europe, but America in particular for some reason, and would overtake our population by 2050. I remember people kind of grabbing onto their kids and the pastor even getting up afterward and really congratulating this guy for warning us all about this threat. And the takeaway that, my whole congregation, all my parents' friends had was, we have to make sure that we ensure that our children have a future in the face of this great threat. And if you know anything about white supremacist circles, they kind of have an idea around that. While the word that people were using when referring to us in that moment was Christian, I think we kind of all knew that we really meant white Christians. As you guys might know, this whole idea is a conspiracy theory, which is totally untrue, called the Great Replacement. It's actually become quite popular in Republican circles with people like Charlie Kirk just saying it in mainstream places as if there is some kind of real coordinated and planned attack and invasion, like Fox News likes to say, of immigrants coming into the US to replace white people. That's ultimately what this is. It's a white supremacist idea that actually was propagated very much by the KKK back in the day, but now it just seems to be a regular thing you can just believe if you're a Republican. And here's something that's so insidious about this being given a pass in my community. At home, as a homeschooler, I was not taught excuses for slavery. I was taught that slavery was bad, that the KKK was a disgusting abomination to God, that, racism was a grave sin like murder. But this just slipped through completely. It existed outside of the framework for how my family understood racism, understood bigotry, and understood how white supremacy operates. They didn't see how their want to spread, propagate, and preserve Christianity in the world could possibly be used to further bigoted ends, or that is actually the main way that white supremacy has always worked in the United States. There's a great channel called Mr. Beat, which I hope you guys are already subscribed to. He has a fantastic video about the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, why it's not true, why it is a conspiracy theory, and nothing more. I will link that in the description and maybe in the cards somewhere here. You should definitely go give that that a watch. You know, given how rampant this conspiratorial and xenophobic thinking is in evangelical and fundamentalist spaces, it's really not surprising that these communities support record high spending to create massive military force to aggressively target minorities and send them to concentration camps. With $76 billion in new funding for them, ICE is training record numbers of new agents to try to meet Trump's demands. This is a huge story with hundreds of sources reporting on this. Sources on the left highlight Trump's deportation goals as influential here, while center-leaning sources tend not to name any particular political figure as responsible. I found this story and compared this coverage where I read all of my news for real on Ground News, an excellent independent app and website I've partnered with for years now because they make finding quality coverage of important stories like this easy. Check them out at ground.news/skeptic. Shockingly few right-wing sources have published on this story, which is odd because I assumed they'd see this as an opportunity to take a victory lap. Y'all let me know why you think the right isn't reporting on this story as much. Fortunately, this story made it into Ground News Blind Spot feed, a feature that shows you important stories that one side of the political spectrum or another is ignoring. Right-leaning users of Ground News have a better chance of seeing important stories like this with this feature right there in their app and in their email inbox. My viewers have let me know that they've gifted Ground News to their right-leaning families before with positive results, so get Ground News for the person in your life who could use a more informed perspective on immigration and ICE. Go to ground.news/skeptic or scan the QR code on your screen for 40% off. There you can get the same Vantage plan I use every day in my real life for just $5 a month. By signing up, you support my sponsor, which in turn supports my channel, so thank you. The public education system is set up to oppose God. Enjoy this clip from Dr. Kent Hovind, a creationist teacher and preacher that my family absolutely loved.
They're always asking me, should we have creation taught in public schools? I say, that's a good question, and I would be glad to discuss that. However, there's another question we should ask first, okay? The real question is, should we have public schools? Let's argue that one for a while first, okay? And if we're going to have them, then we'll discuss what should be taught in them and who decides what is taught in them. I mean, does Bill Clinton decide what's taught, or does Osama bin Laden decide what's taught, or maybe you should decide, maybe I should decide. If you want to see why the schools went public, there's many good articles, one by Samuel Blumenfeld that's incredible about why we have a public school system. It's all part of the plan for a new world order. Big part of the plan.
Yeah, obviously I was homeschooled for a reason. My family thought that public schools were really bad, and ultimately it comes down to they were some kind of mechanism to fuel and push forward the, maybe we didn't call the New World Order, but the current world order of the satanic communist conspiracy. As a really young kid, I just knew that public schools were really scary, that I should be afraid of them, and I was worried that if I ever went into a public school for some godforsaken reason, I would most likely be beaten really badly by the other kids, or maybe even worse. This, of course, being an effect of them not having God in their curriculums and everyone there like being a satanic communist atheist. And even if not every single person in there was really an atheist or satanic or a communist or in on the conspiracy in any way, it was still really dangerous because the unsuspecting people in there that were, were good people, just like misinformed about public schools, were still in danger because this was a playground for literal demons. Like, there's actual playgrounds for children there. Okay, there's just as many demons playing around in the monkey bars. Like, I don't know. It got this way, of course, because this whole environment was designed to oppose God. This is why they taught things like evolution. Evolution was an idea, which I'll get to more in detail later, but created in order to try to oppose Christianity. The reason why they teach sex ed in schools in some places, probably, I don't really know that they actually do that in the state of Texas. Maybe abstinence only. I don't know, you guys let me know what they actually do. Is that even legal here? Anyway, the reason they do that is because they're trying to pervert God's perfect design for sexuality and marriage and that kind of thing. I cannot even imagine what we would have thought about a pride flag being in schools. I can only imagine how horrible they think the existence of pride flags in public schools are. Like, they probably think that it is quite literally dripping with like demonic fluids. And like, this sounds like a joke. This sounds really funny. And if you're laughing, I don't blame you. But Yeah, isn't this exact idea being used to destroy public education in the United States right now? Check out my video about the whole voucher bill thing. Public education in this country is pretty fucked. It's really bad because of these conspiracies becoming mainstream. The Catholic Church was demonic. I spoke about this one with my friend Alyssa Grenfell, an ex-Mormon and awesome YouTuber who, in all likelihood, you have watched or maybe are even subscribed to. She came from a different background, but it was surprising how much we have found that we actually have in common, almost as if Mormons and fundamentalists are not really as unique as they claim to be. Also, Alyssa and I have a collab out on her channel right now. It's about the pipeline that leads people to being a fundamentalist in the first place. I think you guys will really enjoy that one, so go check it out after you watch this video. The two men that essentially helped found the entire sect of fundamentalist Christianity back in the 1910s were American nativists. So what that means is they basically had an ideology that we would recognize today as extreme Christian nationalism, something akin to what the KKK believed. So they believed that this country, this land needs to be basically a white ethno-state. And so that means that not only do we need to kind of eradicate and or assimilate the people who are already here, we need to keep other types of people from coming here. So for fundamentalist Christianity, one of the projects of its founders was to demonize Catholics and to keep Catholic immigrants from moving into this white land. But one of the ways that fundamentalism demonizes Catholic immigrants ultimately is by saying that the Catholic Church is one of the ultimate forces for the most supreme evil that exists in the world. Satan had grabbed a group of Christians and perverted them increasingly over time and made an institution which became the most powerful institution for fighting true Christianity in the world. What did you guys think about the Catholic Church? Would you have said something like, I used to say when I was a kid, Catholics are worse than Satanists or atheists? That's something I really believed.
Yeah, I mean, very similar story, honestly, which is that after Jesus died, this is the Mormon narrative, that his original church that he established when he was on the earth fell into apostasy, is the word that's used. And that the Catholic Church had been basically parading as Jesus Christ's church, but it was the great deceiver. In the Book of Mormon, it refers to the great and abominable church. And so I was taught that that was the Catholic Church. And Bruce R. McConkie and some Mormon leaders made similar comparisons. And so basically, now they walked it back a bit because they're trying to downplay the bigotry in the Mormon Church. But when I was a kid, yeah, the Catholic Church was kind of the great usurper. Basically, it took this great, awesome thing that Jesus had established and was confusing the people to think that. And we would also, like you said, we make fun of specific things about the Catholic Church. We talk about the funny outfits, which is funny because Mormons have their own funny outfits in temples. We talk about how they would sell indulgences. We would say that they would worship idols because they would have crosses or they would have saints. So we would get fairly specific into here's why this is a not worthy belief system. And the Catholic Church, I would say, more than Baptist or non-denominational or any other version of Christianity, the Catholic Church was definitely on the front lines of here's why we don't like it.
If you went to, let's say, a Methodist church or you went to a Catholic church, just say you visited when you were a Mormon teenager, would you have thought that Satan was lurking there, or there were evil spirits that were lurking there that were going to try to corrupt you? Did you think that people would try to corrupt you? Like, did they have an agenda in your mind if you were to actually interact with them?
I would say that I had an agenda.
Okay.
Almost. I would view it as my responsibility to testify to them and to preach to them. So I went to a friend's church once and they were also doing a similar stand up and profess your faith kind of thing. And I stood up and I basically was like, it's very condescending. So it's like a tap on your head, like, you guys have some of the truth, but let me tell you the real program. So it was more like, almost like a sense of bravado of like going to other churches and being like, oh, the Catholics have this little water at the front. That's so nice for them, but it's false. You know, it wasn't like I was scared as much as I was like, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah.
And which is also insidious, but it was more just like this high horse feeling of like, well, I know I have the truth. And so this is like a pittance compared to what I have back at my church, you know.
It kind of reminds me of how some of the QAnon type folks, I think, will act in some political spaces in that, I don't know if you've had the pleasure, but yeah, I mean, they have this idea that they know that the apocalypse is coming in one way or the other, that the storm is coming. They know the one true political reality, and they need to deliver that unto people to help them.
Yeah. And it's kind of like this smug, almost, well, I've done the research.
Yeah.
And I can't be persuaded. My thing is so good, you'll be persuaded. And so I wouldn't say that, I mean, I think that maybe, if anything, I saw the Catholic Church as being somewhat evil, but more it was usually just like, well, I feel bad for you guys.
RFID chips are the mark of the beast. As a kid, because of the things my family would talk about constantly, the sermons that I heard at church, I was really concerned about not taking the mark of the beast. So this is something from the book of Revelation that, long story short, John the Revelator writes that there will be a mark that will be taken by everyone who wants to buy and sell anything. It will be a marker of identity, and it's something that is doled out by the Antichrist. And so fundamentalist Christians are really, really big on end time stuff and believe that Revelation is talking about the end of the world rather than the end of the Roman Empire, which, like, arguably from scholarship, that's what it's actually talking about. And so we were always trying to identify, what is this mark? What's the mark of the beast? And I heard that older folks sometimes thought it was having a television. And then people thought that it was having a cell phone. And then it was having like a credit card, or a credit card that specifically had a chip in it. That was a big thing. But the one that I remember the most panic about in my own household was RFID chips. So something you'd most typically put in like a dog. You'd chip a dog to make sure they don't get lost.
Yeah.
But sometimes people get chips also. And so we thought eventually everyone but us is going to have them. And they'll turn out to be the mark of the beast. And the Antichrist will know his people because they have RFID chips.
Wow.
Was there anything similar about the mark of the beast in Mormonism? Is that something you guys were concerned about?
We didn't talk about the mark of the beast as much as in Revelations it says that there are two messengers who will die in the streets of Jerusalem. And we were taught that those were Mormon. Sometimes it would be Mormon missionaries or apostles. And so we would taught, like, that's a few verses in the Bible that we would still cling on to and talk about. So if you Google like Mormon end times Revelations, some of it will be still from Revelations, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the mark of the beast.
Okay.
Which is funny. It's very cherry picking. Like, whatever happens to crop up in the Mormon consciousness, honestly.
You were worried more about following the news to see whether or not there were two Mormon guys that were going to pop up in Jerusalem and do some crazy stuff.
Yeah, or like it says that there will be a Mormon temple built in Jerusalem. So right now there's BYU Jerusalem, and the church, I think, has a 50-year lease on some land in Jerusalem.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really significant.
They worked pretty hard to get that. And they had to agree to not proselyte to get that lease, basically.
We'll see if they're able to do that.
So members back home would say, well, now that we got that lease, this is a sign we have a foothold, and this is a precursor to the temple being built. And the belief is that when Jesus comes again, that's the temple, that he'll like rule and reign from that Mormon temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But because they haven't broken the ground yet, so that like there's this Mormon prepper YouTuber who has to be like 100+ tab spreadsheet that's tracking every single, I'll send you the link so you can include it below because it's kind of crazy. But he's tracking every Mormon revealed sign of the second coming. And he's like mass collaborating with a bunch of other prepper Mormons who are like figuring out how close we are to all these different signs so that we know how close we are. Because the Doctrine and Covenants also says that no man knoweth the hour, but faithful people kind of do know the hour.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a very fundamentalist thing. Yeah.
And so that's why they're like watching for the signs, because they believe that they will be able to tell the hour, basically.
Wow. You guys go subscribe to Alyssa Grenfell if you want to know more about this niche stuff, because I had never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's wild. All right, let's get into some conspiratorial thinking surrounding the theory of evolution. We believe that there was all kinds of knowledge being suppressed in order to serve the evolutionist narrative, which was a narrative, of course, constructed in the first place to basically do war with God himself. Dinosaurs and humans lived side by side. Here's another Kent Hovind clip.
What happened to the dinosaurs when Noah got off the ark? You know, the question of what happened to the dinosaurs has been used in schools to start a conversation about evolution for a long time. One of Satan's favorite tools to use is dinosaurs, because kids love them. What the Christians did in the 1800s is they compromised their Bible with the gap theory to accommodate the dinosaurs, and then they let Satan have the dinosaurs.
There's a fossil site in Glen Rose, Texas, which I grew up not terribly far away from, which has these dinosaur tracks in this riverbed. And it appears, we creationists thought, like there are human footprints inside the dinosaur tracks. So, it looks like the Bible was right. Adam and Eve and other humans, I guess even in the Americas, walked with dinosaurs. There's a small creation museum very nearby that I had been to with my family and with my church group several times. I remember once actually getting on a bus to go to a like super secret field trip thing that was really being hyped up by the church. I think like children's church, probably 5th and 6th graders were going to this. And I was so excited to see what this was. I knew we were going somewhere far away where we were going to learn a lot. It was about science, and I was so into that kind of thing. And when we got there, I was like, I've already been to this creation museum. Like, they're probably going to recognize me here. I've already seen the footprints. I can tell you guys about this. Now, what we were never taught to question was, why are the human footprints spaced out in the same way that the giant dinosaur footprints are spaced out? I don't really think that our legs are as long or our stride is as long as a dinosaur's, so maybe it's something else. Of course, there are videos out there debunking this whole idea because, yeah, this is just a creationist myth that is actually quite easy to dismantle. But yeah, we were so sold on the idea that dinosaurs and humans had lived together that we thought, maybe they actually still exist and we still do kind of live together. They're just not around as much. There was this photo, maybe you've seen it, circulating around my church at one time, and my family just ate it up. I loved it as a kid, totally believed it was real and not fake, which it's been shown to be fake. Of these, it looks like maybe Civil War soldiers holding up a corpse of a pterodactyl. Guys, it's not real. There are pictures of people hanging out with fairies. That's not real either. Another thing that really rocked my family on this was when we were taught by Dr. Kent Hovind that the word dinosaur didn't exist until the 1800s, which is true. And before that, we called the exact same thing dragons, and that we had really seen them, and that myths about dragons were actually mostly true. You see, people like Marco Polo even said that he saw dragons in the imperial court in China when he went there to visit. He said that he saw great serpents, which in some translations it's translated as dragons when you translate all of this into English. And so we thought, confirmed. Humans and dinosaurs walked together. If you dig into this with any amount of scrutiny, though, you realize that Marco Polo in that instance was talking about Chinese alligators. He hadn't seen Chinese alligators before, and that was like worth reporting. And of course, dragon myths exist because people make up stories about things. It's not actually that hard to believe. Even before this realization about dragons, I'll tell you exactly how sold my family was on this idea. In 5th grade, I had a kind of final assignment for my science class, and we were to write a story that integrated some things that we had learned. I, at this time, was going to a homeschool co-op. Basically, a bunch of moms get together and teach each other's kids different subjects that they were better at teaching. So for science class, I wrote this story about dinosaurs competing in a big race, in a stadium, everybody watching, and I talked about how fast they could run and how big they were, and that was the science part of it. And there needed to be an announcer for the race. And the announcer in the story that I wrote was the Apostle Paul from 2,000 years ago. If I ever find that book, I'll post it. I'll show you guys. There are illustrations of the Apostle Paul in like a suit for some reason, announcing a T-Rex, Triceratops, and I forget what the name was, but a smaller dinosaur all racing. The smaller one won because I was insecure about being short. Cryptids are real, and they're dinosaurs.
What made the dinosaurs go extinct? Do you realize they're asking the wrong question? The question is not what made them go extinct. The question is, did they go extinct? See, the liberals are always real good at getting us to argue about the wrong subject.
If you believe that dinosaurs still exist on the earth today, you find them. And we found them in myths and legends about cryptids all over the world. I had a family member that worked near Lake Champlain when I was a kid. I believe that's near New England. There are stories about something called the Lake Champlain Monster. It's kind of like the Loch Ness Monster, but on a more small scale. My family member told me that every time they flew out of the area, they could see Lake Champlain just off in the distance, and they would look out the window knowing that they would not be able to make out detail from, that distance, but always were hoping to look out that window and see just a glimpse of the Lake Champlain monster cresting up out of the water. They hope to one day visit Lake Champlain directly and see, I don't know what they call it if it has nicknames, but see this monster, which was probably a plesiosaur, a type of dinosaur, I suppose, in real life. That's how real they thought this was. Now, of course, it's somewhat more normal to think that the Loch Ness Monster, a much more famous monster, is a plesiosaur. There's tons of photos. I'm sure you've seen the most famous photo where it looks like there's like a neck sticking up out of the water. And of course, we don't have any kind of real evidence that there's a dinosaur in the lake. People make up stories because we like to tell stories, and that's probably what it is. But as creationists, of course, we believe that the Loch Ness Monster 100% was a dinosaur. Now, in my teenage years, we learned from Dr. Kent Hovind that there was this dinosaur living deep in the interior of the Congo, which all of the Congolese all knew about, called Mokele Mbembe. I think that's how they said it. Apparently, a bunch of creationist missionaries went into the Congo to evangelize to a bunch of people, and some kind of mythical story that the people there had turned into them leading these rather gullible creationist missionaries on long expeditions through the forest, having just near misses with Mokele Mbembe. Oh, it was just right there. Oh, we just saw it here last night. Oh, we just missed it. Look, this is where it nests. Look, this is what it eats. All this type of thing. You end up finding out when you dig into this sort of thing that, these people, these locals, were very smart, and they were receiving material compensation for taking these relatively rich and gullible missionaries through, their backyard, and that the missionaries would then take that information home to a bunch of other kind of gullible people, and then they would send more people, which would pay the Congolese more to take them on more fake expeditions. I want to read a quick excerpt from a book that covers this. Mokele Mbembe in particular is an idea that young Earth creationists like Gibbons find natural and attractive. To the Bible-believing Christian, the idea of dinosaurs living with man in the past, or even some still living today, is scientifically plausible. Christians know that God made all the animals, including dinosaurs, about 6,000 years ago. But the creationist fascination with Mokele Mbembe is not merely that its existence seems plausible within a creationist worldview, but that its existence has important ideological or theological ramifications. For some reason, creationists believe that the discovery of a dinosaur in Africa will overthrow the entire theory of evolution. We did. This belief is poorly founded. We did not realize that. The reality of evolution is based on a gigantic amount of evidence from the fossil record, and a single find of a relic species does not overturn this mountain of data. We did not realize it worked that way. Trey the Explainer has a great video on this. You should definitely go check that out. Trey is absolutely one of my YouTube heroes. Now, Bigfoot is probably the most famous cryptid, at least in North America. We did not have super strong opinions on Bigfoot. The existence of a primate living in the United States didn't really have theological ramifications in the same way that like an ancient creature, like a dinosaur still living today, had. So I guess we didn't think about it as much because if we proved that Bigfoot existed, that wouldn't really show the evolutionists in the same way that proving that Mokele Mbembe existed. Humans used to be at least 9 feet tall and lived to be over 900 years old. So there are some genealogies in the Bible that say that people lived to be over 900 years old. That's how we arrived at that conclusion. There was no other reason. We thought that people grew to be over 9 feet tall because, one, the atmosphere, the creation was different before the flood. It was more perfect. It was more optimized. It was more like the Garden of Eden. The flood broke this thing called the firmament over the earth. And essentially, it stopped allowing the earth to act as a giant hyperbaric chamber. For some reason, we believe that if we had higher pressure, atmospheric pressure, and if we had higher levels of oxygen in the environment, which we thought we did, I suppose, 6,000 years ago when the Earth was created, that humans would be able to grow much larger because certain animals do grow larger in certain conditions that aren't exactly that, but something like that. This is why at creationist museums, it's really, really common to see giant fish like piranhas, giant piranhas, in a very special aquarium where the environmental situation has been changed so that they develop to grow bigger. This is supposed to be proof that humans could grow super, super big back in the day before the flood. We also believe this because we saw pictures of giant 9 to 11 foot tall skeletons that people had supposedly dug up. This is another one of those cases where, I mean, these photos just aren't verified or they're known to be hoaxes if you look into them, but we didn't know how to look into them, so we just bought it. I mean, I remember the first time probably being 12 or 13 and seeing a photo of one of these and just being like, wow, it's just a complete paradigm shift. That humans, and probably all animals, were like double the height, double the size that we are now. That's crazy. I mean, think about the world's tallest man maybe to ever exist, not even being as tall as the average man 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. Now, there were some other actually real fossils that we worked into our thinking here, and those were pre-Homo sapien hominid fossils. You know those skulls where the brow ridges are kind of big? Sometimes there's even, I think it's called a sagittal crest. Erica from Gutsick Gibbon, correct me if I get anything wrong here. I'll heart your comment. But you've seen these skulls where they're not ape skulls, but they're not quite Homo sapien skulls. We looked at those and went, you know what? The features on the face continue to grow over a person's lifetime, which is true. Certain features do. And these have anchor muscles and tendons and these types of things. And these pull a little bit on the bones, which, okay, maybe. And over a 900-year lifespan, they would actually make the skull deform into these shapes. So these were all just normal human skulls, but I guess people who were in their 800s and 900s had big crests on their heads and big brow ridges because they had been making facial expressions for that long. That's really what we thought. We would make some jokes sometimes about how it would be like a blessing and a curse to live to be 900 years old because, I mean, you get to live to be almost 1,000, but by the time you get to be old, you look just absolutely freakish. Like you look like Grendel from Beowulf or something. I'll remind you again, the reason why I've mentioned all of these things is because we believe that all of this knowledge was just common knowledge to the larger scientific community, but it was being suppressed purposely by the satanic communists in order to fight God's will. All right, let's get into some conspiracies about media and pop culture. You guys are probably somewhat aware of this stuff, but I want to get a little bit deeper. Let's start out with hidden messages in music. I had an uncle that was not a young earth creationist. I know. Big shame there. And he got me into the band Queen. I would hang out with him. He would play like Bohemian Rhapsody in his car. And of course, I was like, this is amazing. So I think I got a CD maybe from him and was listening to some Queen as like a 12-year-old. And I remember one day a parent asking me, what are you listening to? I say, it's this awesome band called Queen. And like the immediate reaction was, well, Freddie Mercury, he's gay. And it turned him gay? I'm like, what? He actually worships Satan, and the rest of the band does too. It poisoned his soul, and now the music is made in order to get other people to worship Satan and turn gay as well. Let me ask my wife about this. Taylor, as an actually queer, actual Satanist, does it work that way? Do you like turn gay from worshiping the devil and then make beautiful music to turn other people gay so they will worship the devil? Or like, how does that work?
It for sure works that way.
Okay. You guys heard it here. It does work that way. The part that was supposed to change you when you listen to it was not just like backmasked messages that you've probably heard of, people saying, my Lord Satan, or whatever people thought the Beatles and Led Zeppelin were saying. No, it was actually the rhythms themselves that were infecting and changing people. I ended up asking how rhythms could possibly be bad. Like, what's the deal here? And the story I got was this. African slaves were taken from West Africa to the Caribbean hundreds of years ago during the slave trade, and with them they brought their religions and their traditions, which of course were demonic because they were not Christianity. With their music, specifically heavy drum music, they summoned those they worshipped, which of course were Satan and his demons. In the early 1900s, some good-natured and innocent missionaries went to the Caribbean to try to bring them Christianity and heard their demonic rhythms, thinking them to just be some really interesting, fun-sounding music. Those missionaries end up learning how to play that music and bring it back to the United States. From there, they create rock and roll. Rock and roll is based on religious technology created in order to summon demons, and this was spread throughout all of the United States through the invention of this music genre. The devil had this plan the whole time, and now I was a victim of it. So you see, in this whole complete bullshit story, white people get the credit for creating rock and roll, which white people did not, while black people who were enslaved get blamed for all the moral degeneracy that supposedly comes from rock and roll. How convenient is that for the white people who, I believe, started spreading this myth in the 1950s, starting in fundamentalist circles? Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were created to corrupt and possess children. I'm about to tell you the scariest experience and set of experiences of my entire childhood. I have a chronic illness, have been in the hospital a lot, and even had an anaphylactic reaction to both an asp sting and morphine when I was quite young. And this, I remember, being scarier than that, than almost dying. I got into Pokemon in probably 1999 when I was 5 or 6. I really liked the cartoon, and I wanted to get some Pokemon toys. Specifically, I really wanted a little Charmander toy. I asked my mom if I could get one of these toys, and she decided that she would sit down and watch Pokemon with me to, see what it was all about. I thought that everything was fine when she got up from watching the episode with me, and I went to bed, and we didn't talk about it. Everything was good. But it was really, really not good. Sometime later, my parents came to me and very seriously told me that we needed to have a conversation. I sat in an old recliner in my living room, my dad over on the couch and my mom over in another chair. They're both looking at me and they're like, we have to tell you what Pokemon actually is. See, they had done some research into Pokemon and found that it was evil. And they had to tell me for the first time as a 5-year-old that there were these things everywhere, super powerful, could be with us in the room right now, all over the world, and invisible, called demons. Pokemon were all named after real-life monsters that existed in the real world. They had powers that existed in the real world, super powerful things that humans could not possibly understand or stop. In fact, all of these cute, lovable characters were actually named after real demons that existed, particularly in Japan, where they were worshipped by the people who did not know God. Basically, all of Japan had been captured by Satan himself and were caught up in demon worship. Now, they wanted to entice children to worship demons as well by watching this TV show. And their end goal was to destroy their souls and keep them from God by possessing their child bodies with demonic powers. Upon learning that these monsters existed, that these things could really happen, and that all of this had been happening to me just by watching TV, was still maybe the scariest experience of my life. I was so frightened that I remember still feeling completely glued to my seat. I didn't even want to turn my head because I was afraid that if I looked over, maybe in my periphery, the demons were there, hiding just out of my field of vision, ready to pounce on me, especially because I had just watched Pokemon a few days earlier. That night, I couldn't stop crying and couldn't sleep in my room by myself. I was too terrified. So I had to have either a sibling in the room with me or my parents. And this went on for weeks, if not months. I was constantly horrified. I think this was the definitive experience in my life where I realized that I was not 100% totally safe. Like, that I was mortal, that I could be killed, that I could be harmed, and that maybe even my parents couldn't stop that. And this happened at 5. Sometime later, I went to my cousin's house, and he showed me something he was very proud of, his whole collection of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Now, by that time, I had learned that Yu-Gi-Oh and Digimon and everything else that kids were into at that time was basically the same thing as Pokemon. So I saw these Yu-Gi-Oh cards and immediately just recoiled in complete terror. I don't remember if I yelled, if I ran out of the room, if I told them, no, you can't have those, like they're going to possess our souls or whatever. But needless to say, this was a terrifying experience in a place where I thought that I was safe, at my aunt and uncle's house, who I loved. Then I had sleep paralysis for the first time at probably 6 years old, and I viscerally experienced a skeleton-like demon hovering over me and then kind of crouching down over me while I lay there helpless in my sibling's room. My mother was actually in the room at the time, who I could kind of see because I was partially awake, partially asleep. And so this experience being interpreted through the lens that I had then been indoctrinated into, that demons are real, I saw this as I was being attacked by a literal demon. They got me, and it's probably because I watched Pokemon. I had absolute proof in my 5-6-year-old mind that demons were real and that they were after me, even when my family was in the room. As you might imagine, throughout my childhood, I then had nightmares of demons. When I hit puberty and started having some night terrors, I thought that demons were attacking me in my sleep, and I, again, quite viscerally experienced fighting them in my room, like with my fists. It's horrifying. Then as an older teenager, when I experienced depression, which I now realize was an effect of the repressive environment that I was in, I thought that it was because there was a demon in my room. And I have this really strong memory of being about 16 and looking up at the darkest corner of my room and thinking, this is just the reality that I live under. He's right there, and he's watching me all the time, and he is affecting me constantly, making me sad, sometimes making me not want to live anymore, affecting my relationships with other people, making me a worse person. And I'm really glad that I can turn to God for some help with this, and that maybe ultimately, if I really am a Christian, he can't totally possess me, but he's right there in that corner, and he watches me every night. How fucked up of a thing is that for a teenager to deal with? Climate change is all a hoax. I grew up with the Abeka curriculum. You've probably seen that video with Mini Minuteman going through the creationist textbook. That was my literal 9th grade textbook, or maybe 8th grade textbook. Either way, that was my actual science textbook. That was normal to me. Seeing him treat that like it was so crazy was actually a weird experience for me because, yeah, I just thought that was pretty normal. At one point in middle school, I began learning about environmental science, about the climate, how those things worked, and things about climate change and global warming started coming up. Now, I was presented a bunch of tables, a bunch of graphs, those types of things, and after studying that, I was asked by the curriculum, basically, whether or not climate change was real. This was on some sort of homework assignment or test that came from the Abeka book. And I remember writing very, very slightly based on what I observed from those graphs and charts that even the Abeka curriculum presented. And that was the only question that I got wrong on the assignment. I ended up asking a parent about this, and they told me that the effect of pollutants and emissions from human beings on the environment were like, quote, a fart in a basketball game. Basically, picture a full basketball stadium, a game going on, tons of fans all around. It's an enclosed space, and the environment is controlled artificially. There's a lot of influences there. There's the AC system, there's people's perfume, there's the fact that there's tons of different people there, there's cleaning products that maybe were used on the seats and the floors, there's the food that's in there, tons of things affecting like the air, right? Now, the effect that us humans had on the earth was equivalent to one guy in such environment, a basketball stadium, having a small fart. Yeah, that's how I was taught about climate change, for real. I think I actually challenged this because even as a younger teenager, I was like, I think that, CO2 emissions at least are kind of a big deal, right? And I was told that it doesn't matter about any of the specific factors here. There's no observation we could make that could allow us to conclude that the climate was changing because of humans, because on principle, humans cannot change the environment because God is in control of the environment. To think otherwise is just hubris. This, by the way, is exactly what Ferris Wilks, the co-founder of the Daily Wire, believes. This is why the Daily Wire spreads so much anti-climate change propaganda. It's a little convenient for Ferris Wilks to believe this because he is literally an oil billionaire. Now, I realize that the Daily Wire was essentially created to manufacture consent for oil companies to continue doing things that are killing the planet and threatening the lives of not just other species, but our species. But back in my fundamentalist homeschool days, I was taught that climate change was a hoax that was created to manufacture consent for government control over all our lives, which meant Satan's control over all our lives. Let's wrap up with a fun one. Atlantis was real, and they are covering it up. We thought that stories of submerged continents were true because that fit pretty well with our idea that there was a worldwide flood about 4,400 years ago. Yeah, again, we couldn't understand that there were other reasons why human beings had stories. I do kind of think that if we were able to conclude, as I eventually was able to conclude, that humans can make up stories for all types of reasons. They don't have to be true. Sometimes they just have moral importance to them. Sometimes they're just totally not true and they're tall tales or whatever. Then we would have been able to realize that, maybe our stories about the earth being created 6,000 years ago, that Adam and Eve being the first two people, the getting cast out of the Garden of Eden, that these were all just myths that allowed us to teach moral stories to our children, that they were not literally true. So I guess we had to conclude that just about every story that didn't directly conflict with the Bible as we interpreted it was true. This led us to thinking that, the Atlantis truthers, they're right. And of course, the scientific community out there said all of this was a myth and that the Atlantis truthers were not correct because they were trying to suppress knowledge of God's true creation because they were at least in the pocket of the satanic communist elite. Everything goes back to that. Well, I hope this has been at least somewhat enjoyable for you guys to watch and not too disturbing. To close this out, I'm going to throw it back over to my conversation with my friend Alyssa Grenfell. All of the conspiracy theories that fundamentalists believe and like to spread, I think come down to this fundamental effort, to differentiate themselves from other people, to say, we are this is our identity, this is what we think, and it's different from everyone else. And it is also to say that everyone else is actually either less human than us or less learned than us, less holy than us. And they kind of think it sounds like Mormons do something similar and use similar, I guess, mechanisms to do that. Fundamentalist groups and kind of Mormon groups have weirdly converged on being similar. I don't know. You get that vibe?
Like the Spider-Man meme.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel like from talking to you, there's definitely a lot of overlap, and it's probably just because of human psychology in these devout types of groups. I have a lot of people who watch my videos who are like, I've never been Mormon, but I was raised X, Y, and Z, and that's why these videos are so helpful, is that even if the doctrines are different shades of the same color, the overarching, like what it does to your psyche is very similar, of isolating you from the group, seeing yourself as worthy or not worthy depending on what you wear, how you talk, your intonation, your food that you choose to eat. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities. You cannot discount the level of programming that you've had as a religious person. And it's almost like a well-worn neural path of like, how many times in your life have you judged someone for very specific things growing up Mormon? For me, countless times. Yeah. So it's not just because one day you stop going to physically going and sitting down in a pew, those pathways that you've developed over years are not just
gone,
dissipating into nothingness. You're still going to have the same mental framework for approaching morality and the way you view other people, and even how you relate from human to human. And so I think really taking time with yourself to ask yourself, why am I this way? Why did I have that reaction? Sometimes I randomly will feel like a huge amount of guilt for very mundane things. And I recognize I still have Mormon brain a little bit. Yeah. And that's okay, but I have to work harder to understand why I am the way I am, and to ask myself, do I want to keep feeling this way, or is this way of coping with the world no longer helpful?
All right, guys, you guys should definitely go over to my friend Alyssa Grenfell's channel. She has a ton of awesome videos about leaving the Mormon church, about Mormon lore, everything from cookies to preppers to conspiracies to, I don't know, everything in between. You have blown up faster than just about anybody in this space I've ever seen, and it is totally deserved. So you guys should definitely go check out her stuff. We actually have a collab over on her channel, which is about basically the fundamentalist pipeline. How do people become fundamentalists and why? So go check that out over on Alyssa Grenfell's channel. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support, and praise be unto Our Lady, River, my top patron and the personal Lord and Savior of this channel. Starting soon, patrons at the $5 level and up will get their names in the end credits, although you can opt out if you would prefer not to have that. This is on top of the Patreon exclusive content that they already get. If you want to support my work, then subscribe and check out the religious studies courses I produce with Dr. Joseph Laycock. They should be attached to the video below. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Those are recently updated, so check those out if you need it. As always, remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.